and this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 7. This week it's Terri's turn to share something she has found interesting this week. What have you got for us today, Terri?
Well, Daisy, I wanted to share with you today something that is pretty near and dear to my heart and my life, and it's about time management, distraction, and procrastination.
Oh, that's quite pertinent to mine as well.
I thought we might both benefit from this. So it comes from a podcast episode from the Mindvalleypodcast, and I highly recommend this to anyone. But the guy who runs the podcast and who started Mindvalley, his name is Vishen Lakhiani. And in this, he interviews Nir Eyal, who wrote a book called Indistractable. And he is well known for kind of combining the intersection of psychology and business. His first book was called Hooked, and it was really about building products that create habit-forming behaviors. So apps and things that get people hooked. Now, he also trained people to do this for educational purposes, but obviously you can imagine what he has taught people has helped create a lot of distractions for many of us. So this book is, again, his newer book is called Indistractable and talks about time management, procrastination, and distractions. And currently, especially during the pandemic, people have seemed to be expressing that they are more distracted. They're having a harder time getting things done. Many people are working from home, but being less productive and things. And so I thought this would be a good topic to share, just to kind of reframe some things around distractions and procrastination. So I think the first piece that he covered that was really important for me is he talked about the word distraction. He asked to think about what is the opposite of distraction. And many people would say, oh, it's focus. And he says, well, it's not actually true. The opposite of distraction is traction. It comes from the base word that means to pull toward. And obviously, both of those words end in action. So traction is that which pulls you toward your goals, your values, things that you want. And distraction are things that pull you away from your goals or values or things that you want. So then talks about how we get distracted. And right now, for many of us, the biggest forms of distraction are things that we interpret as important. So if we're working on something, rather than getting down to the brass tacks and doing the actual task, we'll check our work email. We'll follow up on one more thing. We'll watch a news clip because being informed in the world today is so important. And so we will get sidetracked on these things that do feel important, but aren't actually the work that we are supposed to be doing at that time. And one of the things he talks about, a common theme for him is in saying, people claim that they've been distracted. He said, you can't actually call it a distraction if you didn't know what you were doing at that time anyway. So if I'm just sitting here and my calendar's kind of open and I should probably do some work, but I want to watch that YouTube video right now. That's not actually distraction. It's not taking me away from anything because I didn't have anything planned. So I think it's important to just think about how we organize our time and not allowing external things to distract us from what we need to do. So we talked about 2 ways to really help us manage our time, and those are 1, managing our internal triggers. So the internal triggers are things that prompt us to action from within, and external factors are things that prompt us toward action that come from outside of us. And so he uses the example, if you're sitting down to do some work, the pings, the dings, and the rings. Your phone's going off, you're getting notifications, and you're obviously distracted. But he says, really, it is more important for us to focus on the internal distraction rather than the external distractions, because they will always be there. And we can do some things behaviorally to manage those, but more important is to manage the internal triggers.
Yeah, because the external ones are quite easy, really, to manage, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it depends what they are, but the ones you mentioned there, the pings that you get with notifications, well, that's an easy one to change. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things I changed a while ago, where you just turn those notifications off.
Mm-hmm. So again, thinking about internal triggers, it's important to think about, why do we even do what we do? And the old belief was that we do things to seek pleasure and to avoid pain. Freud referred to this as the pleasure principle. Nir, the author of this book and the person being interviewed, he talked about that that's not actually true. Everything we do is actually done to escape discomfort. We are so intolerant of discomfort that that is what drives us to do anything, positively or negatively. But we work very hard to get out of that place of discomfort. So he talks then about procrastination is actually an emotion regulation problem. So we're having this internal discomfort, or wanting to avoid doing something we don't necessarily want to do, or we're feeling something else. And in order to then escape that discomfort, we pay attention to YouTube or the notifications we're getting on our phone or whatever. So again, first goal would be to work on the internal triggers, focusing on what to do about that discomfort. He refers to time management as really being pain management. I thought that was a really neat way to think about it. We are trying to manage our discomfort. And if we can manage our time, we actually manage our pain. He also said that if we don't work to control or manage this discomfort in more healthy ways, that we're always going to be distracted by something. There will always be something. Our child can come in and talk to us. Our dog can do something funny. We can want to, again, watch the news or anything. But if we can work on managing those internal triggers, we won't have to be distracted by those external things. When it comes to thinking about distractions, he described 3 groups of people, or 3 ways we could categorize ourselves. One would be the blamers. This is when we're likely to blame outside things for the distraction. There's just too much interesting stuff going on in the world right now. I have to keep watching the news. There's an election going on. I have to keep up to date. Or it's not my fault that I keep getting notifications every time someone likes my post. The problem with taking this blamer stance is that it means you're powerless to the distractions. They just exist and you just have to deal with them. The next way to categorize would be the shamers. And instead of focusing on external things, this is where people talk negatively about themselves. This is what I always do. I never can get this done. I knew I wouldn't finish this. I'm no good at this. Unfortunately, the result of this is you end up feeling bad, which creates more discomfort. And then even more likely, you will go to distractions to kind of avoid the discomfort. Then the third group, obviously the one that we want to be in more, are the claimers. And this is when we claim responsibility to the urges that we have, complete the tasks. But the claimers tend then to, as I said, take responsibility for their urges and decide how to act on it, to plan better or figure out what they need. He then talks about this time in the world for people almost anywhere. There's so much more uncertainty going on. And so just a general state of more discomfort, a lot of unknowns, a lot of trying to respond to things as we learn more. So he talked about what he calls the 3 Ds to get through uncertain times. So 1 is determine. This is where we gather information. 2 is decide what we're going to do about the action. And then 3 is to do. But one of the things he focuses on throughout his whole talk is the idea that it's okay to take time to do each of those steps. They don't have to become distractions. But the way for them not to be distractions is to actually schedule time in to do them. It's okay to give yourself time to watch the news and catch up on what's going on. It's okay to watch a Netflix movie to escape everything. It's just not okay to do those things at a time when you're supposed to be doing work or another important task. So he then talks about a couple of important strategies. And I have not read the book, but in the book, I know he goes into a lot more detail. And these are actually supported with science. They're not just him making up a strategy, but they've actually been tested and shown to be effective. So again, the managing your internal triggers. And one way to do that is what he refers to as the 10-minute rule. So let's say I'm sitting down to write a document and I have an urge to go watch YouTube for a few minutes. I'm getting stressed out, so I decide I really want to go watch YouTube. His strategy is that you allow yourself the opportunity to do that, but you have to wait 10 minutes to do it. So I check in right now and say, okay, I really want to go watch YouTube, but instead I have to wait. So he sets a timer. In 10 minutes, I can go watch YouTube. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is what he refers to as I'm going to surf the urge. I'm just going to be aware of what that urge is. Rather than act on the urge, I'm just going to, again, sit with the urge. What typically happens is people find in 10 minutes, they really don't need to go watch YouTube because they've already kind of addressed the urge and they've continued to work. In this interview, Vishen is very funny because he mistakes this and says, oh, I do that all the time. I let myself go watch it for 10 minutes and then I come back. And Nir said, no. You actually wait 10 minutes before you give in to the urge. And I thought this was really interesting that one of the reasons they find this as an effective technique is that many of us feel like we should just set a hard no about an urge. So if I want to go watch YouTube, I should just tell myself no. And I just keep telling myself no, and I just stick to that hard no. The problem is this increases the tension. And then when I finally go watch YouTube, by giving in, it actually reinforces that action because it provided me relief of all of that tension I had been building up by saying no.
Oh, yeah.
So unfortunately, sometimes saying no, and then doing it just reinforces that you're always going to go to that distraction. It actually is more rewarding.
Well, it creates that battle, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because you're just denying it all the time.
Yes. And so, yeah, exactly. His point then is if we keep taking that, I'm just going to keep denying the urge stance, eventually we give in and that it becomes even more rewarding. We get more relief. So instead, better to say, I can do that. I can watch YouTube, but I'm going to wait 10 minutes. Oftentimes, by the time we get to the 10 minutes, we don't go do it. But we're not creating that added tension of denying.
Interesting. How does that tie in? I wonder if that ties into, I've read a lot about these people who set the timers. They work for most of their day on these blocks of time, like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and that they have to actually, at the end of that, they have to get up and take a 5-minute break or something.
In actuality, that is exactly his point. His next big strategy that I think for me was one of the biggest takeaways is what he calls time boxing or a time boxed calendar. And I loved hearing this. The first time I listened to this episode, I was so excited because I have never been someone to keep a to-do list. I do not organize my day with a checklist. I come from a family with at least 2 people who are really good at to-do lists and checklists, and I always felt like somehow I was just failing because I couldn't follow them. And interestingly, research has shown that people who use a time box calendar actually accomplish more than people who use a to-do list. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the time box calendar, it's where you actually kind of set out time to do whatever it is you say you need to do. So as you just described, you would block out times in your day. I'm going to work on this email for 20 minutes. I'm going to edit this podcast from noon until 1. Now you know what your traction is. And so now you are more able to stick with it rather than giving into the distractions because you have a blocked in time. The concept for me that was really interesting about this is the idea that a to-do list is output based. You check off when you've accomplished the task. And the reality is productivity is input based. You get things done by inputting, and that is time. And so what they found, again, people who were more focused on, I'm going to box out this time and focus without distractions, rather than focusing on getting the task done, they actually are more productive. So by making the goal, not that I have to be completed with the task, but I need to complete the time that I've set aside for it without distractions, that there is the shift that allows them to be more productive.
I found that completely true. When you decide that you're going to operate for a block of time without distractions, it's amazing what you can get in a small block of time as well. Like where I put the timer on for my bacon in the morning, it's 15 minutes. And I might have a fairly small task that needs doing that I would have just, messed about and put off with it. Right, no, 15 minutes, that's a little block of time that I can get that social media posting done. I think, right, I'm just going to use that block of time.
Absolutely. Instead
of quote unquote wasting it.
Absolutely.
I'll watch that YouTube video while I'm eating the bacon, but for that 15 minutes while it's cooking, just going to get it done. And it is amazing what you can get done when you focus that way. You're absolutely right. As you're saying it, I'm thinking, yeah, that is true. I've seen that happening.
And I think from a mindset perspective, again, if I approach the task with, I have to work on this task until I get it done, that can feel daunting. But if I say to myself, I have to focus on this task without distractions for 45 minutes, the goal is just the time. That's much more doable than the output, the final completion of it. What if it takes me 6 hours? But if instead I focus on, I'm going to do 45 minutes on this, that actually helps. Now that I'm thinking of it, I actually did this at times while I was writing my dissertation, which was a very painful process. But I would actually give myself times that I had to sit down and write. No, you have to be at the computer for an hour right now. And this was before we had so many technologies of all of the distractions. But rather than say you have to write chapter 1 today or you have to edit this chapter, I could just set aside the time. And I did find that I was more productive when I did that.
Yeah, it's a good way of just switching the perspective a bit and taking the pressure off. I love that juxtaposition that the opposite of distraction is traction. I love that's where you started with you think the opposite with distraction is focus, but it's not, it's traction, and it's all hinged on movement, whether you're moving forward or whether you're being pulled back from that. I love that way of looking at it. And I think you and I both suffer from this pressure of feeling the importance of always being productive, or what we consider to being productive, and not quote unquote wasting time. So I like what you said about reframing that quote unquote wasted time and giving it traction instead of just putting it in the distraction bin.
And I know one of the ways that I struggle with this without kind of putting those boxes into a schedule is I worry about not being productive, but I spend a lot of time allowing the distractions. And again, even as he said, those aren't even distractions because I didn't have anything scheduled in there anyway. I just allow them to be my time fillers. I think something that I struggle with, and I think a lot of people may be struggling with right now, even more so than usual, is trying to figure out what is the traction we need, what is important to do. And I think On one way to look at it, things like watching Netflix movie or playing a game on your phone or something like that, it's easy to see that that is a distraction. It's easy to see that that wasn't moving us toward the goal of getting a task done. But these other things that do feel important, like keeping up with the news or something else, one of the things he said in the interview is he said, the problem is that we've allowed distraction to trick you into prioritizing the urgent at the expense of the important. So the urgent need is the pressing need, the phone ringing, the notification you received about something. So that's urgency. But often we've learned to prioritize that over what is actually important to do. And that's how it becomes distractions. It's taking us away from what pulls us toward our goals.
Coming back to that traction. I just love that. I love that. Distraction, traction. It's all about movement towards goals. That's a great way to look at it.
And I was most excited about feeling vindicated for not keeping a to-do list.
Yeah.
One of the things he said is that basically to-do lists are wish lists. And again, what often happens with them for a lot of us, some people do use them successfully. So if you do, keep doing that. That's great. But for someone like me who does not use them well, writing down a list of things I need to do and then not accomplishing them actually makes me feel worse. And again, what am I going to do if I'm feeling worse about myself? I'm going to get more easily distracted because I have more discomfort. So for many of us, keeping a to-do list actually is counterproductive.
Yeah, I was going to say, you just described the exact same thing that I do. I have a to-do list, and then when you haven't checked things off, you just feel deflated. You feel unproductive. You feel like you've wasted time. You haven't achieved the goals you wanted to. But how do you get around kind of needing a list of things you need to do and not having a to-do list?
That's a great question.
Although I quite like what you said about actually to-do lists are having a wish list. You could rebrand it. This is the wish list rather than a to-do list.
Although I could see that kind of backfiring too, because the wish list is, they never happen. So I don't have wishes.
Yeah.
But I think what you just highlighted is really important. He's not saying don't be organized. He's saying use the time box calendar to do that. That time boxing is really the way to map out what you want to accomplish, put it into blocks of time, and include in that schedule those things that you want to do that are not work related. And I think for, again, maybe based on different personality styles, but for me, the idea of blocking in times feels better than a list that just looms over me. That doesn't help me organize myself for my personality. I flounder with a to-do list, and then at the end of the day, look at it and think of all that I didn't do from my list. So it's really actually a defeating process. But if I take what do I need to do today and where will I do it, that can be a very different experience.
Yeah, I think you're right. You need to identify what your personality type is and how you tend to approach things.
But clearly for you and I, a to-do list, a standard to-do list does not work.
It does not work very well, no. So I think my takeaway this week, and something that I'm going to try, and I think would be a really easy thing for people at home to try, is that 10-minute rule that you spoke about, and just putting off when that distraction comes into your mind, is just sitting with that and allowing it and saying that it's fine to do that, but just offsetting it by 10 minutes. That's definitely something I'm going to be putting into practice this week.
Great. I think that's one I'm going to practice, as well as focusing more on making time for traction. Even side things can be traction if they're planned. And so using that time boxing to really shape out my days, my weeks, so that I have my traction really planned.
Well, it sounds like we both have some really helpful things to take away from this episode, and we hope you do too. We'll see you next Monday. In the meantime, have a great week.
Have a good one, everybody.